Hello, family. This video is called God Can Sound Like the Devil Too. Now, before you cancel me, okay, before the red lights click off, right, I want you to know that this video is a video about faith. Let's look at Genesis chapter 15, verse 6 real quick. Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. And Abraham believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. We are counted righteous not by what we do, but by our faith in Christ. Right? In the book of Genesis chapter 22, God tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah and offer his only son Isaac as a burnt offering unto God. Right? So let's go to Genesis chapter 22 real quick. Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 12. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith, right? God tested Abraham's righteousness, right? And there's going to be times where God's going to test our righteousness. It's not by what we do that God tests our righteousness. It's by how we respond. It's not by what we do, it's by how we respond. How we respond is based on our faith, right? Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. So God just told Abraham to do child sacrifice. Okay? I want you guys to keep that in mind real quick. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took two of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for a place God had told him about. On the third day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told the servants. The boy and I will travel a little farther. We will worship there, and then we will come back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offerings on Isaac's shoulder, while himself carried the fire and the knife. As two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, the boy said. But where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son. Now Abraham knows what God just told him to do. And what God just told him to do was child sacrifice. But Abraham knows his God so well. Abraham's relationship with God is so strong to where he understands the nature of God. He knows God. And in his response to his son, the person that God told him, the thing that God told him to sacrifice, his response to it was, God's going to provide the sheep. Even though I know in my mind God said it was going to be you, but I know that God is going to provide the sheep. But Abram's only able to give that response because of his relationship with God. How strong is your relationship with God? Are you allowing God to test your faith to build that relationship? And they both walked on together. Verse 9. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, so Abraham's about to do it. Abraham is about to offer his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. What I really want to say, that Abraham was about to offer his son as a living sacrifice upon the altar. The same way God tells us to offer ourselves upon God's altar as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing. Right? Here I am. Verse 12. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horn in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. So the interesting thing that happened there is, in the Bible, there's a verse where God asks us, his children, for us to offer our bodies to God as living sacrifices upon his altar, holy and pleasing. Right? The same way that Abraham offered his son as a living sacrifice upon the altar. Right? So give me a second. Give me 1 second. Here in Romans 12:1. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. So, what Abraham did for God by giving his son as a living sacrifice upon the altar was representing what God is saying here, Romans chapter 12, verse 1. What we do as Christians by giving up our own way, right, and giving us our bodies as a living sacrifice, sacrificing what we want and becoming more like Christ, sacrificing our life that we may live a life of Christ, right, and be that he might find acceptable, be holy and pleasing, is what Abraham was representing with his son upon that altar. Now, has it ever occurred to you that what God asks from Abraham sounds like a request only a pagan God would make? Throughout the Bible, we see pagan nations and even God's people, Israel, sacrifice their children to idols. Abraham was no stranger to these pagan gods, yet he didn't question the voice he heard. He just simply obeyed God because of Abraham's obedience, because of his faith. God counted him as righteous. Right? So, let's go to Psalms real quick. Psalms 106. No. So Psalms 106, verse 34. Israel failed to destroy the nations in the land, as the Lord had commanded them. Instead, they mingled among the pagans and adopted their evil customs. So this was the pagans' evil customs. They worshipped their idols, which led to their downfalls. They even sacrificed their sons and daughters to demons, right? So they would worship these idols, and they would offer their children as sacrifice. And here we see God asking Abraham to offer his son as a sacrifice. But why? But what's going on here? Did God really want Abraham to kill his son? No. God wanted to see if Abraham was going to be obedient. And the only way Abraham was going to be obedient was by his faith. Right? It wasn't the work, it wasn't the action, it was his faith. Right? And of course, God provided the true sacrifice, which was the lamb. Right? So there's a lot of times, so what I'm saying is there's certain times in our life, or there's certain things, right, that God has requested from us. And perhaps it sounded questionable, like, is this really from God? I'm sitting here to tell you this, right? That though it may sound strange, Have faith and trust in the voice. Why? Because even if it's not from God, right, God will protect you from doing harm to yourself. Simply because he sees that the only reason why you're carrying on is because of your faith, right? God just wanted to see Abraham's faith. Though God told him to do something drastic, God wanted to see if Abraham was going to do it. And because Abraham obeyed and had faith, God protected him. God saved him. And instead of allowing Isaac to die, he provided him the lamb. So in the same sense, it's like, though something that may sound crazy, may cost you something, God just wants you to have faith and follow his voice. And if it would cost you something, trust that God will provide the answer and save it. So this is a test of faith. Because remember, you're not counted righteous by what you do. You're counted righteous by your faith in God. And faith only comes by relationship. Relationship only comes by your walk in Jesus. Because of Abram's obedience, because of his faith, God counted him as righteous. In the book of Numbers, chapter 21, God sends Israel on a route from Mount Hor to go around the land of Edom. The people began to complain about the journey, so God sent poisonous snakes among them to bite and kill them. God then told Abraham to make an idol, a bronze serpent, and to set it on a pole so that whoever gazed upon it would be healed. So we're going to read now Genesis chapter 21, verses 4 to 9. Numbers chapter 21, verses 4 to 9. Then the people of Israel set out from Mount Hor, taking the road to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. But the people grew impatient with the long journey, and they began to speak against God and Moses. "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die here in the wilderness?" they complained. "There is nothing to eat here and nothing to drink, and we hate this horrible manna." So the Lord sent poisonous snakes among the people, and many were bitten and died. Then the people came to Moses and cried, "Oh, we have sinned by speaking against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take away the snakes." So Moses prayed for the people. Then the Lord told him, Make a replica of a poisonous snake and attach it to a pole." So God just told him to make an idol, make an image of a snake and place it on a pole. All who are bitten will live if they simply look at it. And then he told them to gaze at it. And if they believe that if they look at this idol, they'll be saved from their sickness. So Moses made a snake out of bronze and attached it to a pole, that anyone who was bitten by a snake could look at a bronze snake and be healed. Right? So remember, the reason why the poisonous snakes came out was because the people began to complain against God and Moses. Right? They were getting hungry. The journey was long. They were getting irritated. It's hot. And so because of all that, the people began to complain and get angry at God and Moses, saying, "Yo, this manna is trash, by the way." And so because of that, right, God sent poisonous snakes to bite them and had a specific way for the people to be healed. And God did it this way because of this. God wanted to see who would obey what I'm telling them to do. Because if they have faith that if they look at this pole that they will be healed, then they will have faith that even though through this hard journey, right, that they will have faith that I'm going to bring them to a place flowing with milk and honey. So it's really to remind them to have faith. But again, here we see God telling the Israelites, telling Moses to make an idol and to gaze upon it. Something crazy, and saying that if you look at it, you'll be healed. But why? Faith. It's not about the idol. It wasn't about the child sacrifice. It was about faith. It's something crazy, right? But if you can be obedient in God in drastic situations, you can be obedient to God in anything. We know that in pagan worship, one or more of the commandments of God is broken. God told his people to never kill and to never make idols of anything on earth or in heaven. Yet he told Abram to sacrifice his son and Moses. Yet he told Abram to sacrifice his son and Moses to raise up a bronze serpent in the wilderness, both which are pagan practices. But what makes one truly a pagan? Right? Now these are pagan practices, right? But what makes one truly a pagan? All right, let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. You know that when you were still pagans, you were led astray and swept along in worshiping speechless idols. You know that when you were still pagans, you were led astray and swept along worshiping speechless idols. So verse 3. So I want you to know that no one speaking by the Spirit of God will curse Jesus, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. So a true pagan is someone who worships an idol, a speechless idol, something that has no divine authority, something that's not God. Just to put it bluntly, right? But both these events came from God. God telling Moses to offer his son as a living sacrifice, right? Which is poetic in nature, as we saw in Romans 12, right? And then God telling Moses to raise up a bronze serpent in the wilderness and for the people to gaze at it. Though both of these things are dark and these things seem to go against God, right? They both came from God. And God wanted to see, will the people trust me in these dark times? Will these people be obedient and know that I'm in control? Excuse me. Is God telling you something that seems dark, that seems like it just doesn't make sense? Right? Now, I'm not telling you to go out and kill someone if you're hearing a voice that tells you to kill someone or to harm someone, right? Because that goes against the commandment, right? The Bible says this: love thy neighbor as you love yourself, right? But if something is telling you to do something drastic and it just doesn't make sense, but you're sure that it's God, right? Have faith that God will reveal it to you and that he will make way for it. A pagan is one whose worship is outside of God. A believer is one whose worship is towards God, and true worship is obedience unto the Lord. Even though the request that God gave to Abraham and Moses seemed pagan in nature, what Abraham and Moses did was not pagan because it was a sign of faith and obedience to God. Their actions as a form of worship was towards God. Their heart was towards God. So though the actions seem pagan in nature, their hearts were toward God. Romans chapter 2, verse 29. This. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And a true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law, right? It's not merely just obeying the laws that you see. Rather, it is a change of heart produced by the Spirit. And a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God, not from people. It is a change of heart. It's when your heart is towards God, seeking to please God. That is a true circumcision. That is a true uncovered heart. That is a true Jew. That is a true child of God. God gave Abraham a ram as a replacement offering instead of his son because of his faith. And the Israelites who chose to gaze upon the serpent were healed. Not all the Israelites gazed upon the serpent. Those who didn't, I believe, were choosing to obey law rather than have faith in what God had told them. Evidently, those who chose to obey written law instead of obeying a direct order from God perished from their disobedience. Remember, we're not righteous by our works. We're righteous by our faith. And faith is shown by your obedience to what God is telling you in this very moment. Our faith in God is greater than the law. God is not the author of confusion, and he doesn't change his ways. God will never go against his word. It is only when we have faith in God do we keep the law, which is to love God and obey his commands in our lives. Exodus chapter 20, verse 6. God may ask you to do something that may seem dark or mysterious, but if you walk in faith, he will shed light on it. For we must not lean on our own understanding. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Remember, to have true love is to hopeth all things and to believeth all things. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7. I have faith this edified you. Thank you, family, for watching.